The moment I walked into my regional manager's office and saw the man from the airport coffee line sitting across from her desk, not in the rumpled raincoat and carry-on he'd had that morning, but in a pressed sport coat with a company lanyard around his neck, I actually forgot how to stand. My hand was still on the doorframe. I just held on to it for a second. The way you grab a railing when a step turns out to be shorter than you expected. He looked at me the same way he had 3 weeks earlier over a paper cup of coffee he'd never actually gotten to drink. Patient. Almost like he'd saved the expression for this exact moment. My regional manager looked up from her laptop. "Close the door, Megan." I did. Then I sat down in the chair across from her desk and tried to look like a person who was not currently running an emergency diagnostic on every interaction she'd had with a stranger in the past month. Let me back up. I was 14 months into my position as an account coordinator at a mid-sized logistics company in Atlanta, which meant I had gotten very good at exactly two things: keeping my email inbox below 40 unread and smiling through meetings where I was the youngest person in the room by about 15 years. The office was the kind of place where people had been doing things a particular way for so long that suggesting a different way felt like arriving at someone's Thanksgiving dinner and asking if they'd considered a different stuffing recipe. You could do it. People would be polite. But you'd feel the temperature change. I traveled for work about once a month. Never anywhere glamorous. Charlotte, Cincinnati, sometimes Dallas. Just quick turnarounds for client check-ins that could have been phone calls but weren't. Because our VP of sales, a man named Roger, believed that FaceTime closed deals in a way that Zoom calls never would. Roger had been saying this since before I was hired. Nobody had successfully argued him out of it yet. The trip to Chicago that October was a 2-day thing. A vendor meeting on Wednesday, a client dinner Wednesday night, fly home Thursday morning. I had a 7:15 departure out of Hartsfield, which meant a 4:45 alarm, which meant I was standing in the security line at the B terminal at 5:50 in the morning, running on the kind of sleep that doesn't really count. I got through security, found the gate, and then went looking for coffee because the alternative was sitting in a plastic chair for an hour and 40 minutes with my own thoughts, which didn't seem survivable. The coffee kiosk near Gate B14 was one of those small airport counters, 3 sizes of cups, 2 roasts, a rotating display of muffins the size of a human head. There was a line. I got in it. I was looking at my phone because I had 7 unread emails from the night before, and Roger had a habit of sending follow-up emails to his own emails if you didn't respond within what he considered a reasonable window, which was approximately 45 minutes. Including evenings and early mornings. The man ahead of me was probably in his mid-60s, gray at the temples, a raincoat that had seen a lot of airports, a rolling carry-on with a luggage tag I couldn't read from where I was standing. He ordered a medium dark roast and went to pay, and the woman behind the counter told him his card had been declined. He tried it again. Same result. "I can try it as credit," she offered. "Please," he said. Declined again. He had that particular stillness that some older men carry, the kind that doesn't broadcast embarrassment, but doesn't quite conceal it either. He patted his coat pocket, then the front pocket of his pants, the way you do when you're hoping something will be there that wasn't there a second ago. There was a small line forming behind me. One guy in a suit was already exhaling audibly, shifting his weight, doing the thing where you telegraph inconvenience without actually saying anything. The man looked at the cup on the counter and then said quietly, "I think I left my other card in my bag. Let me just," and started to reach for the carry-on zipper. I don't know exactly what made me do it. I was tired. I had Roger's emails to answer and a vendor presentation to mentally rehearse and approximately zero emotional bandwidth for anything that wasn't already on my to-do list. But something about the way he said, "Let me just," the patience in it, the way he was working so hard not to inconvenience anyone, just landed on me wrong. The good kind of wrong. "I've got it," I said, and handed the woman my card before either of them could say anything. The man turned around. He looked at me the way people do when they're trying to determine if they've been helped or handled, because those are genuinely different things and most people can tell the difference. "You really don't have to do that," he said. "It's coffee," I said. "Please." He held my gaze for a moment. Then he nodded once and said, "Thank you." Not the reflexive version, the kind that comes from somewhere further back than manners. I paid for my own coffee, found a seat near the window, answered Roger's emails, and mostly forgot about it. I had a plane to catch. The Chicago trip was fine. The vendor meeting ran long. The client dinner went well enough that I ordered dessert, which I took as a good sign. I flew home Thursday, feeling the specific flatness of someone who has smiled professionally for 48 hours and is now using the last of their reserves to make it from baggage claim to their car in long-term parking. I reported back to Roger on Friday morning. He asked about the vendor, made a note in the system, and then told me, with no particular preamble, that he was putting me on the Halverson account. I want to explain what that meant. The Halverson account was the biggest client our regional office managed. It was also, by general consensus, the most demanding one. The previous coordinator had left the company after 8 months on it. The one before her had requested a transfer to a different region. Roger had a way of presenting assignments like gifts, with a tone that made it hard to tell whether he was rewarding you or testing whether you'd break. Halverson specifically requested someone detail-oriented, he said. I told them I had exactly the right person. He said it like a compliment. I nodded like I received it as one. What followed was 6 weeks of the most sustained professional pressure I'd had in my working life to that point. The Halverson team had a preference for last-minute changes and a low tolerance for the consequences of those changes landing on anyone but me. They'd revise shipping specs 48 hours before departure window and then want to know why the adjusted quote hadn't hit their inbox yet. They had a standing weekly call at 8 a.m. on Thursdays that was scheduled for 30 minutes and routinely ran 90. Roger's feedback style was its own category of challenge. He didn't shout. He didn't send harsh emails. He had a particular way of asking what was the thinking there in meetings that made it clear he already knew the answer and found it insufficient. He'd circle things in printed reports with a red pen, actual red pen, physical paper, and leave them on your desk without comment, like a teacher returning a failing quiz. I got 3 of those in my first 2 weeks on Halverson. My colleague in the next cube had been with the company for 4 years and had developed a studied serenity about Roger that I admired and could not replicate. Her theory, which she shared with me over bad cafeteria coffee one afternoon, was that Roger had come up in a business culture where pressure was the methodology, where the way you proved someone was ready for more responsibility was to give them responsibility they weren't quite ready for and see what happened. She didn't think he was cruel. She thought he was operating entirely within a framework that had worked for him for 25 years and had never been seriously challenged. I found this analysis accurate and completely unhelpful for getting to a Thursday morning course. I started keeping a running document, not a work document, a personal one in a folder on my desktop labeled with an innocuous name. I logged every question the Halverson team asked that I hadn't been able to answer immediately, so I'd never be caught on the same thing twice. I read every piece of documentation I could find on our logistics software. I came in early twice a week to work through the account history before anyone else arrived. Roger acknowledged one of my restructured shipping proposals with a single "looks good" in a reply email, no other comment. I saved the email. I told myself that was something. It was a Wednesday afternoon in mid-November when I saw the man from the airport again. I was coming back from the parking garage after retrieving a folder I'd left in my car, something I'd walked down 3 flights of stairs to get rather than admit to Roger I'd forgotten to bring it upstairs. And he was standing in the building lobby talking to our company's head of operations, a woman named Sylvia who had an executive presence so refined that she made other executives look like they were still practicing. Sylvia was holding a portfolio and listening with the specific attentiveness that senior people reserve for conversations that matter. The man was in the same raincoat, same rolling carry-on. He saw me before I reached the elevator bank. He nodded, just slightly, the same unhurried nod from the airport. I smiled back. I pressed the button and got in the elevator and spent the next 4 hours thinking, occasionally and without resolution, about who he might be. The next morning, I was called into my regional manager's office. Her name was Sandra, and she had held the regional manager role for 9 years. She was the kind of person who gave you her full attention when you were speaking and made you feel, for the duration of that attention, like you were the most important problem she had. She didn't call people in for small things. I knocked. She told me to come in. And there he was. He was still wearing the raincoat over a sport coat now, and there was a lanyard around his neck with a badge I hadn't seen before. He had the same carry-on parked by the side of the chair like he'd just arrived or was about to leave. He looked exactly the same as he had at gate B14, except for the badge. The badge changed everything. Close the door, Megan, Sandra said. I did. I sat down in the second chair, and for a moment the three of us just existed in a room together without anyone saying anything. Then the man leaned forward slightly and said, I think we've run into each other before. His name was Howard Breck. He had spent 28 years in supply chain operations, 12 of them building and running logistics networks for a company that, before it was acquired, had been one of the 5 largest freight brokers in the Southeast. For the past 3 years, he had been working as an independent consultant, brought in by parent companies and regional boards to assess operational culture, identify structural inefficiencies, and make recommendations about personnel and leadership at the regional level. He had been retained by our parent company's executive team 6 weeks ago. His methodology, which he described without apology, was to embed without announcing himself. He ate in the cafeteria. He sat in common areas. He took the same parking structure everyone else took. He observed. The airport was coincidence, he said. I was flying back from a different engagement. I was not there to observe you specifically. He paused. But I noticed you. I thought about the paper cup. The audibly impatient man in the suit behind me. The way I'd handed over my card before I'd really thought about it. I spent the weeks after that in your office, he said. I sat in the common areas. I attended 2 all-hands meetings where I was introduced as a systems consultant, which is technically accurate. I watched how people interacted with each other and with leadership. He looked at me steadily. And I sat in on 3 of your Thursday morning calls with the Halverson team. My stomach made a quiet, private decision to relocate. I want to be direct with you, he said, because I think that's more respectful than being careful. He had a way of choosing words that made you feel they'd been considered and not just grabbed off a shelf. The coordination work you've been doing on that account is not average. The revised freight sequencing you proposed in week 4 prevented what would have been a significant delay, and the proposal itself demonstrated a level of systems thinking that is not common at your role level. I had rewritten that proposal twice. I had stayed until nearly 7 on a Tuesday to get the formatting right, and then second-guessed the formatting all the way home. I also observed how your direct supervisor provides feedback, Howard said, and his tone shifted in a way I couldn't quite name. Not colder, more deliberate. He picked up a folder from Sandra's desk. I hadn't noticed it there, and opened it briefly, then closed it again. There are patterns of feedback delivery that are passed down in organizations the way habits are passed down in families, he said. People don't always examine whether the habit serves the purpose it's supposed to serve. They assume it does because it was used on them and they turned out fine. He set the folder back. The way your manager returned your work this past month is not the methodology your parent company intends to support. That assessment is not only mine. The room was very quiet. I had received a marked-up print of my Q3 compliance summary 2 weeks earlier, left on my desk without comment. I had stayed an extra hour that night going through every mark. 3 of them were stylistic, not substantive. 1 of them was a formatting preference that contradicted the company's own template guidelines. I want to be clear about what this meeting is and isn't, Howard said. I am not here to resolve a specific complaint, and I'm not asking you to make one. The assessment of your regional operation is ongoing, and the recommendations I'll make to the parent company's leadership are based on 6 weeks of observation across multiple employees and leadership levels. He looked at me, but I wanted to speak with you directly because of what I watched you do with the experience of being treated the way you were treated. You didn't withdraw. You didn't become reactive. You got more precise. I thought about the document on my desktop. The folder with the innocuous label. The 6:45 a.m. mornings. The airport, I said, because it had been sitting in the room since I'd walked in. You paid for a stranger's coffee and went to catch your flight, he said. You didn't wait to see if I turned around. You didn't make sure I saw you do it. It was just coffee, I said. I know, he said. That's why it told me what it did. Sandra spoke for the first time since I'd sat down. Howard is meeting individually with a small number of regional staff as part of the assessment process. You're one of 3 people he requested. She folded her hands on the desk. We're not asking you to make any decisions today. Howard nodded. I do want to say one more thing. He leaned forward slightly, and there was a weight to it that made me hold still. What happened to your work this fall is not the standard this company holds, or the standard its leadership intends to hold going forward. There will be structural changes to how feedback and performance review are conducted in this region. Those decisions are made. You should know they're coming. He paused. You didn't cause them by being here today, but you should know why they're happening. I walked out of Sandra's office at 11:17 on a Thursday morning, stood in the hallway for a moment, and then went back to my desk because I had a noon call with a freight carrier rep that I hadn't rescheduled, and a Halverson status update due by end of day. My colleague in the next cube looked up when I sat down. She had an instinct for the difference between Megan had a normal morning and Megan has information she is currently processing in real time. She waited. I told her what had happened in the order it had happened, which still didn't feel like the right order. She was quiet for a moment after I finished. Then she said, The airport. The airport, I said. You paid for a stranger's coffee on a 5 a.m. flight to Chicago, and he turned out to be the person writing the report about your entire regional office. That is a factually accurate sentence, I said. She thought about this. Then she said, I want to be the kind of person that happens to. You would have paid for the coffee, I said. I'd like to think so. But I was in that security line behind you at 6 a.m. in September when the woman ahead of me couldn't find her boarding pass, and I definitely sighed loud enough that she heard me. She shook her head. I'm not sure I would have. I thought about that. About how many mornings I'd been in lines, looking at my phone, calculating time, running arrival scenarios. What had been different about that particular morning in October? I'm honestly not sure there was anything different about me. I was tired and undercaffeinated and had a full inbox and no patience to spare. The man's face when he reached into his empty pocket had done something to my autopilot that my rational brain hadn't gotten around to approving yet. That was all. Maybe that's the truest version of how small decencies happen. Not that we're better than our worst instincts, just that sometimes we act before our worst instincts finish making the case. The weeks that followed were strange in the specific way of knowing something is changing without being able to point to the moment it changes. My Thursday call with Halverson continued. Roger continued leaving marked up papers on my desk, though somewhat less frequently. Sandra stopped by my area twice without a specific agenda, which she'd never done before, and asked follow-up questions about projects I hadn't flagged to her directly. I noticed it but didn't comment on it. In early December, an email came from the parent company's operations director to the full regional team. It was written in the precise, careful language of corporate communications, the kind where every sentence has been reviewed by someone whose job is to make significant announcements sound like routine updates. New regional feedback protocols, effective Q1. A peer review component being added to annual performance assessments. A newly created regional operations lead role reporting to Sandra to support coordination between account management and logistics. Roger forwarded it to me with no message, just forwarded it. 2 weeks later, Sandra sent a team announcement. The new regional operations lead position had been posted internally. She encouraged anyone interested to put in for it. My colleague walked over to my desk with a printed copy of the announcement and set it down in front of me. She didn't say anything. She just set it down and went back to her cube. I read it twice. Howard Breck's name appeared in a company-wide communication in January, listed as a senior advisor to the operations restructuring initiative the parent company was launching across 4 regions. His brief bio mentioned the freight background, the consulting work, 3 industry awards I hadn't known existed. There was a photo, professional but recognizable, the same steady expression, the same posture that somehow managed to look deliberate in a still image. I was sitting at my desk with a cup of coffee that had gone lukewarm when the notification came through on the company intranet. I read the announcement twice and then sat with it for a moment. My rotation onto a new internal project meant my direct report structure was shifting in February. The account lead I'd be working under was a woman named Kiko, who I knew only by reputation and one brief introduction at a quarterly meeting. The reputation was good, methodical, fair, the kind of person who asked clarifying questions before forming opinions. My first week working under her confirmed all of it. She ran project check ins like actual check ins, not auditions. She said, "I'm not sure yet," when she wasn't sure. She asked me once about a career negotiation I'd flagged, not just what my recommendation was, but why I was confident in it, and then actually waited while I walked her through the reasoning. It was the first time in months that explaining my own work felt like part of the job rather than a liability assessment. I still kept the document on my desktop. Not out of anxiety anymore, just because the habit had stopped feeling like defense and started feeling like craft. Writing things down. Staying with the question. Not letting the things I didn't know pile up somewhere they'd be harder to reach. On a Friday afternoon in late January, I ran into a new hire in the stairwell. She was a recent graduate, maybe 3 months in, and she was sitting on the landing between the second and third floors with her laptop bag on her knees and the particular expression of someone who is trying to decide whether to go back upstairs or not. I stopped and asked if she was okay. She said she was fine. The way people say fine when they mean something else and are hoping you'll take the exit ramp. I said I'd sat on that same landing in my second month and eaten lunch alone because I hadn't figured out the cafeteria situation yet, and it had felt like the least conspicuous place to fall apart a little. She laughed, surprised, the way you laugh when someone says something you expected to feel alone in. Then she stood up, adjusted her bag, and we walked back up to the office together. I showed her the faster elevator bank on the east side of the building that saves about 3 minutes during the lunch rush, and the shared drive folder where the good carrier contact spreadsheets were kept, which nobody had told me about for 4 months and which I'd stumbled onto by accident. Small things, but they move in a direction, one way or another. They always do. I finished my coffee that afternoon, cleared my inbox down to 12, and went back to a routing proposal I'd been building out for Halverson. Still on the account, still in the 8 a.m. Thursday calls, except now the calls ran 32 minutes and I didn't brace myself before joining. The work was the same work. The building was the same building, but something had shifted. Not dramatically, not in the way of landmark moments, just in the small daily texture of showing up. You learn things in your first real job that nobody puts in the offer letter. Some of them are about the work itself. Some of them are about what it looks like to be treated fairly and how you recognize it, partly because you've seen the alternative. Some of them are about who you are at 5 a.m. in an airport coffee line when you're running on 4 hours of sleep and your inbox has 7 unread emails and the person ahead of you is quietly hoping nobody notices he can't pay for his breakfast. I wasn't trying to be anything in that moment. I was tired and I was looking at my phone, and the transaction just happened before I thought about it enough to talk myself out of it. That's maybe the most honest thing I can say about it. You don't find out who you are in the moments you've prepared for. You find out in the ones where you're too busy to perform. I've thought about that Tuesday morning more times than I can count now. Not obsessively, just the way you return to a thing when it keeps offering you something new each time you look at it. What I keep coming back to is this: I didn't do anything extraordinary. I was tired and behind on my emails and already dreading a day I hadn't started yet. Howard was just a man in a raincoat who reached into an empty pocket, and something about that particular moment, the way he went still, the way he kept his voice even, made me move before I thought about moving. That's the whole story. There's no larger plan underneath it, no calculation. I didn't pay for his coffee because I thought it would matter. I paid for it because I was too depleted to construct the reasoning that would have let me look away. And I think that's actually the more honest version of how people end up doing decent things. Not because they've achieved some elevated state of character, but because sometimes the gap between noticing something and acting on it is smaller than the gap between noticing and talking yourself out of it. What followed? The 6 weeks under Roger's red pen, the restructured proposals nobody asked me to restructure, the mornings I came in at 6:45 with nobody watching. None of that happened because of the coffee. It happened because I made a decision, somewhere in the middle of feeling genuinely beaten down, that I wasn't going to let the way I was being treated become the way I treated my own work. Those are two separate things, and keeping them separate was something I had to choose actively, not once but repeatedly in small ways that nobody tracked. Howard saw it because he was there and he was paying attention. But it wasn't for him. It was never for anyone watching. That's the part I want to hold on to. The idea that the work you do when nobody's evaluating it is still work. It still counts. It accumulates somewhere even when you can't see the ledger. There's something about sustained pressure that either clarifies or corrodes, and I don't think the outcome is fixed. I think it has something to do with what you decide to do with the discomfort. Roger's red pen made me more careful, not because fear is a good teacher, I don't think it is, but because I refuse to let it make me smaller. That refusal, repeated every day, over weeks, without reward or acknowledgement, is its own kind of discipline. And discipline practiced in private is a different thing than discipline performed for an audience. The new hire I found on the stairwell landing, she reminded me of myself in a way that was almost uncomfortable to look at directly. That expression of someone deciding whether to go back upstairs. I didn't tell her it would get easier because I don't know that it will for her specifically. And I think people can tell when you're offering comfort instead of honesty. What I told her was true. I had sat in that same spot, not performing okayness for anyone, and it had been okay. That was all. Sometimes that's enough. What you extend to a stranger at 5 a.m. and what you extend to yourself under pressure and what you extend to someone newer than you who's struggling, those are all the same instinct, showing up in different forms. You practice it or you don't. And the practicing is what shapes you, not the moments when someone notices. I caught my flight that morning. I did my work that fall. I paid for a cup of coffee I never thought about again until it walked back into my life wearing a lanyard. That's the whole thing. That's all it ever was.